Oh man, doing same old. How are you doing?
Um, well, uh, I'm adapting, I guess
I'm.
is a good way to say it.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
trying to. I'm still adapting. Let's say that. I'm not.
Oh yeah, like
I
I've
haven't.
just I've
Yeah,
just started the
I
process.
haven't successfully adapted, but I'm in the process of figuring out what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So I think that's a good I don't know, sort of a
Mm-hmm.
a thesis for like what I have on my mind as like a comic book creator in general at this point in their
Yeah.
quote unquote career, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I've been using the phrase creative journey because
yeah.
career sounds so sad because
Yeah.
it's not a career, like
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a pathway. It's a
yeah.
so
I heard uh, one of my collaborators, colorist Paul Little,
yeah.
is doing some stuff with you. Yeah, did I hear that correctly? Or
Yeah,
some?
well, we're talking. We're in the talks, and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out like all of these lovely things that we have to figure out as
Yeah.
creators, like page rates and budgets
Mm-hmm.
and times and all that real stuff that actually has nothing to do with the story that you want to tell.
I
So
know it's so frustrating.
yeah, and you know what's funny is so I had if I can untangle this web of how I actually got to meet Paul.
uh,
I was talking to Jeremy Muller
yeah, yeah.
of Outland,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd gone to him for a pinup for Northern Steel, and we were just talking back and forth about the series, and I'd mentioned something about a colorist, and he mentioned Paul as someone who might be able to, and then like I was like, yeah, cool, let's see his stuff, and then like so I check his credits, and then I find out like all the stuff he's colored, and then like I just talked to you the week previous,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know that he had done like so much like collaborative like stuff with you. So that was like
Yeah,
small fucking universe.
I
It's
know, right? Yeah. Yeah,
so
Paul messaged me and he's like, "Hey, I think I might have some work coming up with the guy that you talked to on your podcast." He goes, "If I end up working with him, that means I'll basically have worked with like everybody you've talked to." Because because like Kansas City is kind of quickly, he says it's become his like go-to area. Like there's just a lot of
really,
creators there. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Well, I mean, Kansas City, that area has a good comic book scene, as I
Yeah,
understand it. But he's also Canadian, so he doesn't really understand the difference between Kansas City and St. Louis. He kind of thinks they're the same thing. And I'm like,
right.
well,
No,
they
it's
are
just
both in the same state, but they're like 4 hour difference.
right. Yeah, they have nothing to do with each other. They actually
Right.
couldn't be more opposite.
Right,
But
right, yeah. But
regardless,
he was like, yeah, between me and some other St. Louis friends, and then this Kansas City work that he's certainly getting a lot of work from Midwest America.
yeah.
They're
No,
keeping him paying his bills.
it's funny. Like it just I had never heard of him until I listened to your podcast because, like,
Mm-hmm.
I checked him out after that, and like, it's just wild that a guy like that who like he was just like rattling his credits on your
Yeah,
other episode, and I was just like, I've read that, I've read that, I've read that, like,
I know.
and, I feel terrible because I was never like looking at the colorist's name when I was at that age of reading a lot of the stuff that he worked on,
Sure.
but like it's crazy like to be like, yeah, man, like you've been working in comics as long as I've been reading them, almost,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it,
I know.
like at least reading them seriously as to like you care about who is a credit, who's working on the book.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I remember when I kind of had that like awakening moment where I'm like, oh, there's names here, and these are the people that
right,
are. It's not just a Spider-Man comic book. It's not
yeah,
just an X-Men comic book. Like this
yeah,
means something, and I like it was. If I can get a little biblical, it was like eating the forbidden fruit, and it's like my
yeah,
eyes were opened, and it's like all of a sudden, like my perception of the world completely
yeah,
changed.
totally.
It's
I
so
mean,
weird.
your perception of comic books, like from a reader perspective, has suddenly changed.
Yeah.
Like honestly, you get to that point. I mean, it's a pretty close equivalency to like sports because
Mm-hmm.
you find someone who like you're a fan of and you just follow them and like you don't really care actually whose character it is, like just that this guy's writing them or this guy's drawing them or this team
Mm-hmm.
is like working on the book. They're just like, yeah, that's awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's like a paradigm shift in how you read comics, you know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It absolutely was for me. Like I remember that it was very specifically like a shift in how I
Yeah,
even just understood them. Yeah.
like it was like one day you looked at the cover and you saw like real people's names. You're like, oh, I know that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Like putting
so
it all together.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so
Well,
hopefully, we're gonna try to work together. You know, like I said, it's the
mhm.
indie comic book thing, so it's not like, you know, boom, boom, boom. We're
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
business, you know. So
That's something that I still struggle with that, like the pacing, because I am so damn impatient, you know.
right,
And
yeah,
it's like when I write a script, I got one issue done. Let's make this MFR. Like, you know, like I just spent so much time writing this. Let's get it
right,
done.
yeah.
You know, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's a
It's
process.
it's interesting because I think that, I mean, maybe there's a bit of naivety with writers in how we first get into this, because
For sure.
I think what happens, and maybe this is my experience, but like
Mm-hmm.
once you get serious about comics and you get serious about writing them and creating them from
Mm-hmm.
the writer's perspective, like you really actually get serious about the transactional manner of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't mean to sound cold, but like if I pay you for a page, like I want that page, right?
Yeah,
Like we're
absolutely.
doing this. If you are taking a page rate, you are promoting yourself as a professional,
Mm-hmm.
and I am promoting myself as a professional by paying you your desired or negotiated page rate.
Or
And
yeah, agreed upon page rate.
right,
Yeah.
and you know, and being fairly on time. I'm not saying that I need a page every week, you know, and I'm not saying that I'm like, don't understand, I'm not a heartless human being over
Well,
here.
it all depends on what the what the agreement was. It's like that classic the triangle,
Yeah,
like fast, good, or cheap. You can pick two. You can't
right,
have
right,
all
right,
three. You know.
right.
And
So
so a
you got
lot
to
of
find where
yeah,
your comic lies on that.
exactly. You got to find where your production schedule fits in that. And
Yeah,
on an indie level, more often than not, I think you almost are forced to try and shoot for uh, cheap and good, and you
yeah,
have to
right,
sacrifice speed,
yeah,
just because
absolutely.
like it doesn't do anybody any good to quickly put out a crappy looking comic book. Like
No,
the fact of
no,
the matter is, it is still a comic book. The artist matters. The
yeah,
artist matters a lot,
right,
and so you need to have something that looks good. And on an indie level, there's less deadline pressure.
right.
Like it's not like you're trying to hit it like the monthly sales, or your editor is
Yeah,
going to
like
lose their job.
right. You know, the diamond preview isn't like, you know, tomorrow. So
Yeah, or if you're even in diamond, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, so yeah, it's easy. It's easier to sacrifice the speed aspect, the fastness aspect of it, which is why it's so difficult for me, who's so impatient.
right,
And it's
right,
like I realize that we're sacrificing speed, but gosh darn it, like
right. You know, like
you know,
this is not an email of where's that page at. It's just saying, hey, what's up, man? What's going on?
yeah,
Like, you know,
yeah. How we
like
doing?
yeah, and
What's yeah.
so that's, you know, like I just think that sometimes it's easy for us writers to be like, dude, I paid you, you know, where's it coming from? Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
let's work on this. But like
Yeah.
honestly, that's the opposite of my experience, because I have worked with so many writers who are working on 10 different things, or artists that are,
Mm.
you know, doing 10 different things that, you
Yeah.
know, it's, I guess it's to the thing of like where you get as a creator, where you're the priority point, you know, that's kind of the goal, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because then you can just be like, boom, you know, like my book's kind of like taking precedent, and that feels good, you know, because I've like done the work and I've made the name, and you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's. I don't. Well, I'll probably keep a lot of this in. I think it's good.
yeah,
Good
absolutely,
discussion. But I will go ahead and say, like, I am talking to Scott Schmidt again.
again,
First
second
returning.
appearance.
Yeah, first returning guest on this podcast,
Oh,
and
nice.
that's just that's just the type of privilege you get from being a fellow comic book writer and not one of those lowly artists that I have to
Yeah,
talk to in all the other episodes.
those guys.
Those guys. But we had actually talked about doing a second episode not because it had anything specific to promote, but more or less to just talk about the process of
Yeah.
putting together an indie comic. And I think that's a really good idea. Trying to think of the best way to put this, the most um, mm, polite and professional way to put this. But I think there's a lot of value that can be gleaned in listening to the creators and the artists and the producers who are not in the top 1% of success stories in what they do, because I think there's a lot of romanticization that goes on in the arts. And so like we all look at Robert Kirkman and we go, wow, that guy, he is a success story. He made an indie book, then he made a book at Image, and then he made another book at Image, and they got so popular, and then he made a TV show, and now he can just do whatever he wants. And what's the secret to success, Robert? And he goes, well, the answer I don't want to put words in Robert Kirkman's mouth, but whenever you have this type of situation, the answer often comes out as some sort of like platitude of like, just be yourself and be true to your art, and your audience will find you. And it's actually interesting that I brought up Robert Kirkman, because he was one of the few creators I think that was actually very forthcoming and straightforward about, like, he was like, yeah, nepotism played a little bit into it. He was friends with Eric Larson, and so he got it's like, oh boy, that just changes your perspective on everything, right? Like,
I didn't know that.
you're friends with one of the president of Image Comics, so that's
one of the pillars.
Oh, okay. And that's not a dig at Kirkman's quality. No. Like, he's certainly earned his place, and I'm a Kirkman fan. You can listen to the podcast I did with my friend Chris McJunkin. We both are huge fans of Invincible, and they're very influential on the work that we do together. I have a signed copy of Invincible number 13 by both Robert Kirkman and Ryan Otley. They were the first comic book creators I ever met in person.
Nice. That's wild.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan. But I do think that there's something that, like, when you look at a success story and you're like, wow, look at them doing it. And then you find out that little piece of information of like, yeah, he's friends with Eric Larson, and he had that at Image, It's like, okay, that changes things. And there's a lot of people, that and there's a lot of people that kind of gloss over that, and they're just like, well, all you have to do is just be yourself. And it sounds so simple, and it's really not.
No, it's not at all.
So that's one of the reasons I just wanted to talk. It just like have a more open discussion about just like things that go into making a comic.
Yeah,
because I mean, especially from the writer's perspective, because I do think that there's a lot of people that kind of get into it. They like comic books. Maybe they're not, confident in their artistic abilities, or they just know they don't have some, but for whatever reason they want to write a comic book. And to be fair, it's really easy to put together a comic book, like, comparatively. Like, if you want to make a short film, there's a lot of work that is involved. Like, you can make a comic book. I do think that that's one of the great things about comics, is that anybody can do it. But there are just things you need to know beforehand. And
and like, it depends on what book you're making, like what kind of book and like you mentioned, like filmmakers and stuff, like it's that whole spectrum of like people who are just like on the inside using it as vehicle, and people who are like making truly comic books because they love comics. So
but so that was one thing. Just kind of tying up my thought of just I do think there's a lot of value that can be had from people that are just kind of in the grit, as it were, like, in the trenches. That actually is the phrase I was thinking of, like the people that are in the trenches. So, what I don't remember if I asked you this question the last time we talked, but what is the one thing that you wish you would have known for sure when you first started? And I know, and I don't want, like, there's a lot of things that's like, well, I wish I would have known this. I wish I would have known that. I mean more like what's something like you can,
like what like what came back to bite you.
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. Like
Yeah.
it's not just like, yeah, exactly. Like what kind of
Like,
thing like really that you can quantifiably say like that really messed me up in ways that if I'd done it properly it wouldn't have.
yeah, no, yeah, I totally have. God, pick one, huh?
Oh
Ouch.
yeah, right.
No, like,
Well, one thing that I always talk about, because I don't want to just put you on the spot, you can think about it. But one thing that always gets brought up is that I always heard the number one advice everybody said was don't come up with a long form series, just do a
right.
short story.
Yeah.
And my dumb ass was like, I've got a 100-issue epic that I want to do, and I'm going to do it as a
Right.
webcomic so it can be on the internet forever and just be
Yeah.
this long running thing. And it's like looking back, it's like, I want to keep doing it. It's not that I don't want to do it, but I'm like, it's really easy to get burnt out on it and
Oh yeah,
just be
totally.
like, oh, I'm so sick of this. And also it didn't take off and it's not a huge success story. So now
Right.
I'm kind of stuck in this. There are people that like reading it and I don't want to
Right.
disappoint them.
I love all 8 of them,
Exactly. Yes. I can name them all first and last name and they're
Right.
good. They're good, great people. But yeah, but at the same time, it's like, well, I'm trying to not go broke doing this. Like I need
Right.
to, and then there's also the creative fulfillment of like, sometimes you're just not feeling
Right. And like,
your 100 issue epic that you thought was a good idea
exactly.
5 years ago.
Well, and I think like once you get to a certain stage in like telling stories in general, not even just comic books, however it is that you tell stories, like, you just get to a point where like there are certain stories that like you just got to get out there, and like, I don't know, as comics go, that makes it one of the hardest mediums for a writer, I think, to actually do it because it does take so long, So you have to wait that long and that much of a process to, like, to see something done, and like that's killer, and that just like mounts and mounts and mounts. Because like, I mean, like, how many books do you have like ready to like rock? If like you had an artist and you had a budget, how many books?
I literally just made a list the other day because I'm like going through everything and I'm like,
that's totally a thing.
I'm like, which one am I going to push next? Like,
right, you rank them, like which has the most appeal, which has like, actually the most navigable budget, like,
right, yeah, like okay, this one can work in black and white, so just like I'm gonna cut out old Paul entirely. Sorry, Paul,
right.
but
exactly, yeah. Like you have probably like what, 10, 12?
Oh, minimum.
Yeah,
my
like,
folder is huge.
Yeah, right. So like, as a creator, that's just so like, that's so tough, to have those just build, and it takes so long to get them done. Like, I'm still working on the ones that I started with, right?
I know. Yeah, that's the thing. That's I rebranded myself as Second Thought Comics because it's like, I'm at that point where everybody kind of has that self-evaluation where they're like, maybe this was a waste of time and I shouldn't have done this. On second thought, I could have spent my money doing this, instead of making comic books. But I'm still in it. Like I just love comics.
Well, when you weigh that, when you have that, and like making comics still, it just means more. It does. Like I don't know, like, because I do that too. I think about like just how much like I love general like reading and comics and video games. Like if I spent my money on those things, like would I be happier? Probably not. Like I'm pretty much just happy making my own stories.
I agree, and that is something that kind of has to be underlined, and I don't think can be understated. Is the sense of creative satisfaction is really great. Like that is like, in a way, it's like the chasing the high for me. It's like, man, if I can finish that book, it's such a satisfying feeling. Like it's really hard to describe unless you're in, doing the same thing.
Yeah. Like any work that you have, like you can say that, like, you can check this out from beginning to end, enjoy, like that's for the most part, like if you're putting it out there, you're pretty confident, it's probably pretty good, it's worth somebody's time. So that's
absolutely. But going back to the question, like anything you can think of that.
Well, I think my, like, and I'll speak to me personally, I think my expectations were set really high. for how quickly I thought I could get to where I wanted to be as a comic book writer. And I think that kind of had a little bit to do with like knowing people who did write comics professionally, and not necessarily before. I went out to meet them, and I established some relationships and some rapport, and like just that idea that I could be like this person. I just have to do it, and like you don't see the 10 years they put in.
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
don't figure out that they did, and they were working that long and before where they are now. Like, there's a few people who strike it gold, but for the most part, the people that you admire, you're like, oh man, you find out, oh, they did all the work. And like when you first meet them, it's like, oh, they're a success, they write amazing stuff. Like,
yeah.
So I think that for me personally, I got to know someone. I like decided on a project. I had my idea that I was going to spend this money. I spent all this money. I pitched a book, and like it was the worst experience of my life.
Oh no.
Like I went to a con, I met some people, and like I just came away from it being like, oh, that went terrible. And it did, because I never heard from anybody again,
Yeah.
So like I think that for me personally, I started climbing the ladder in the right way, but I think that I tried to jump a few rungs before I was ready.
Yeah.
And because I didn't know, and I still don't claim to necessarily know as much, but I didn't know a fucking thing about like books and publishing, the publishing side of it. Like books pitching to like companies because it appeals to them, because it's popular, because it's a good genre. Like I was convinced in what I was pitching because I fucking loved it, right? Like, but that doesn't mean that like it makes sense to this publisher who has like a certain line, a certain
they're
vibe
looking
to publish, right?
Yeah, they're looking for certain things to
right. And I think even more tied up in that is I thought that if I got good enough art, that there was no matter if the art was good enough, they would publish it no matter what. So I could go out and I could find someone who was killer, but the story's not so good, I thought maybe it didn't matter. So I think I learned some lessons, and like the first thing I tried to put out to a publisher, I learned that I wasn't ready. This is basically what it was. So
yeah,
like,
I had a similar experience, just especially with the naivete that you're talking about, and maybe having too high expectations. And it's a tricky thing to evaluate about yourself, because I was always somebody who was like first of all, I came into this comics thing not as like a teenager right out of high school, or even just out of art college. You know what I mean? Like it was actually a little later for me. I had done several years of like various school and other artistic things and jobs, and I was like, this is just something that I want to do to keep myself from going insane. And I always had this attitude of like, because I just have, all the things that I'm interested in are not necessarily like mainstream success things. Like I'm into indie punk rock, and not like the genres. Like I got into music, like obsessing over like 80s DIY bands, and like the SST label, and and Sub Pop and stuff like that. And so it's like I definitely had this perspective of like, you don't need to be on the radio to be successful, or you don't need to be published.
To be good.
Yeah, you don't even need to be good. You don't need to be published by Marvel to be successful. You can do it yourself. You just have to figure out how. And I think I still kind of clung to this, like, just make your thing, and that's all you need to do. And and it's like, so I would always have this thing of like, well, I'm not expecting success, but at a certain level, I kind of was, even if I didn't want to admit that I was expecting it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think so. That's just your pride talking. Like,
exactly. Yeah. It's like, I know I'm better at this than some people.
Right. Like, I know this thing that I'm making is a little bit better than some of the, the professional stuff I've read. So.
Right. Well, I always say that's the biggest, and we don't have to dwell on this too much, because I do want to keep talking about just more fundamental stuff of making a comic book. But I do always struggle with there's that creative the evaluation, the self-evaluation that comes from, it's easy to look at yourself and be like, okay, obviously I'm literally not the greatest person ever. I can pick out
Right.
a dozen creators that are at the top of their game and I can't even hope to approach them.
Yeah.
But I can pick out a dozen more who are working professionally and I know they're hacks. Like I
Right.
know they're not as good as me.
Yeah.
So why them and not me? You
Yeah.
know, like there's that.
And there's that nepotism.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a lot of that there. I like,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, so it's I think, but I think it's important not to dwell on that. It's easy to
Yeah.
dwell on that because it's just easy to, well, I mean, you know,
Well, it's impossible not to,
it's
and
impossible not to, and it's really natural.
Yeah,
To
right. You
just,
have to an extent. It's
you have
just
to
like
acknowledge it.
Yeah, yeah. Your ability to get away from it, like after you give it
Yeah.
enough time.
But I do think that it's a better use of your time to keep focusing on yourself and your
Right.
own work and just get yourself, like I always say, like, this is something I talk about with my other collaborators, and something that I frequently tell myself is like, okay, maybe I'm not the best, and I'm definitely not the worst, and I might be upset that there's people that I think are worse than me that are working, but that
Right.
just means I need to work harder to
Right.
literally be the best. And then who's going to say no to the best?
Right.
Nobody. And that's, I mean, and that's still a little naive because that's not acknowledging the various ways that the industry works.
Right.
But,
the creative process either, like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cause I've kind of come into that too, where I'm like, I make things that I want to make, and they look the way I want them to look. And then I look and I'm like, well, the things that I'm making do not look like the types of things that are making it big. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, so what does that mean? How do I absorb this information? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, like, yeah, let's just talk a little bit more about putting together a comic book, because I do think like we talked about expectations. Like it's incredibly important to keep your expectations low. And I think that ties into the whole idea behind starting small.
Yeah. No,
like,
you're right.
You need to not get ahead of yourself, and you need to just do a short story. And then after you've done a short story, do like a self-contained issue.
Right.
And then just do more self-contained issues, and then maybe do a graphic novel. But
yeah,
I do think that there's aspects of, especially if you're a creator who, if you like really want to get into this, you need to learn the language of comic books. Like I think there's a lot of people that step into this where they're like, I got an epic idea, and I can imagine it as a comic book, and it'll be the next Spider-Man, but like, that doesn't mean you know anything about storytelling. That doesn't mean, and so there's a lot of, that goes back to the starting small thing of like, you need to just take it literally step by step and just work yourself. And then over time, by the time, and because that'll also help you with the production stuff, because
that's very true.
If you can put out just a couple issues a year, like, you are doing really well. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm,
well, I remember, like, the first thing that I produced from pencils to inks to colors to letters was 4 pages. Like, and like, I just kind of remember that as being like this, like, really, like, big thing that I was doing, and it's like 4 pages to come in and critiquing those, like, and it's crazy then, because, like, the next one was 8. And then, I think I probably did, a couple more, like, same things like that lengthwise. And then I was on to my first issue, like, you just have to, because if you go straight to a standard sized issue, like, it's just going to suffer, because you can't.
I think so. Yeah.
Because I think no matter what, even though your standard comic book is only 22 pages, or, give or take a couple, like, that's still long form comic book.
Yeah.
But, like, but you need to, but long form comic book is still short term. Like it's short into one long. It's like, so, like, you have to be able to tell a 4-page scene before you can get to an 8-page, like, story. Like, just have to build upon it. Otherwise, you'll just tell a bad story in 22 pages. You'll waste a lot of money, and it won't be very good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the biggest lessons. Start small.
Yeah.
and we're saying that from experience. And you know what? The people who said it to me said it from experience, and I still didn't listen. So I'm sure there's people that aren't going to listen to me, but you know what? It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it really is. Like it's the best way for you to like, I don't know, create longevity in doing what you're doing. You know, because I mean, we probably combined, it took like 2 or 3 years to tell a couple full comic book stories page wise and paying for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I just kind of see it as like you just kind of blow your chance on one issue when you could have stepstoned your way into it and figured out how to do it.
Yeah, so. I agree. And it with going with what you're saying is it's also just you got to think about things economically. And it's such an economic waste to jump into like a full issue's worth of story and then to have it not be good that you can't even show anybody.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Printed, that you hate to sell it, like, whatever.
Yeah. And in a way, that's kind of what the whole pitching process is about. It's like, don't make your 100-page epic, make a good pitch. And
being said, like, sorry to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
I want to have a discussion about pitching.
It's on the list because we're going to talk about it because it's something that I'm not particularly good at.
It's
the worst. I have limited experiences with it, but I do have some experience. But but we were just talking about this concept of like starting small. That's like from a creative standpoint. But let's say like people are moving in, like there's also just the production level of like you're a writer, so you need to find an artist. You need to hire an artist, and this is something that I get people asking me this question at pretty much every convention I do, or I have somebody that just comes up and it's like, how do I do this? Like, where do I find, how do I get somebody to draw my comic book? It's such a like a wide question because I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know where to begin. Like,
right.
Like
there's the blunt way. And then there's like the,
the first answer is like, just don't, run away.
Right. Yeah.
But, it's like you find an artist and I don't want to gloss over that too much, but there are resources out there. Like, I kind of came up right at that tail end of the golden era of digital webbing, the message board website. And I know they still exist.
Yeah.
Where you can post like want ads, but honestly, the best way is to just find like, with social media now, artists are all over social media. You can find DeviantArt, Twitter, Facebook. Like you can just look for artists, and so I'm not saying it's not a lot of work because you're going to have to dig through whatever. But you don't even have to post an ad. You can just go on Twitter, and if you know a few people that are kind of plugged into the comic book scene, just be like, hey, I'm looking for an artist. Does anybody have anybody to recommend? Point me in the direction of somebody that does work, and you will be able to find it. Like, and then you just talk to them and you work out a page rate, which that's kind of the magic aspect of this whole thing.
I mean, that's the only thing that matters, right?
It is the only thing that matters. Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I hate the page rate so much. It's like, I don't know. It's like a Seinfeld topic, like I just hate the page rate. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But like I think like if we want to go in and like just sort of talk about that aspect.
Well, let's jump right into it because it's an awkward thing because I do think that a lot of the public discussion about comic books is definitely slanted toward the artist. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll just say that. In our previous podcast, we did talk about that a little bit. And I'm not even going to say that that's like wrong necessarily because it's like it's a comic book, like it's art first, and it's also the comic book industry, which is historically and famously just awful to artists. It's artist driven, and it also is. I mean, every story of every creator ends with them like quitting in disgust or losing everything. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of Jack Kirby, and I just read his biography, and it was all stuff that I'm very familiar with, but it's all fresh in my mind now. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just the history of him and Marvel, Siegel and Schuster with Superman, like all of these creators that just created nonstop. But this is kind of the unfortunate devil's advocate that you have to play is contracts exist for a reason,
Right.
and these contracts were signed. I am not saying that it's fair that Superman
Moral.
or moral. Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying it's fair that Siegel and Schuster got like $400 for Superman, and then Superman went on to become a multi-billion dollar, industry
Right.
franchise. I am not saying that's fair, but like that was the contract. For every one Superman, there's a million other Golden Age heroes that went nowhere.
Right. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
DC owns them all
Mhm.
because they paid for them at the time. And I do think that there's various other shenanigans that went on that do venture into the less legal area, and one of them was the question of ownership of the art, the actual art pages. Like that was a thing with
Yeah.
Marvel.
Hmm.
Marvel kept all of Jack Kirby's pages, and they were like, "Oh, we lost them," and then they were just like giving them away to people and stealing them, and they were trying to blackmail him or at least bribe him into being like, maybe we'll give you your pages back if you keep quiet about this or sign this release, and it's like they never had an entitlement to his pages,
Right. No.
as far as I know. So yeah, that's pretty dirty, which that actually is one thing I wanted to talk about is the whole this, because I do think this is something just on the subject of things that people don't know when they're getting into comics, or a writer wouldn't know when getting into publishing comics, is the original art and who owns it.
Yeah.
Because when you pay, essentially the prop in a lot of the confusion I do think comes down to people not having clear contracts or people
Yeah.
not understanding why things are the way they are. But when you're making a comic book, traditionally, you are paying for the publishing rights to the art. You're not paying for ownership of the art itself.
No.
And this has been even easier to enforce now in the digital age because I get everything as a digital file. The
Right.
reason Marvel was able to keep all of Kirby's pages is because he had to physically send them the
Right.
pages so that
Because they had the
they
pages.
had to copy them and
Yeah.
put the art and the coloring on them, and that's they needed the literal physical pages for the
Right.
printing of the comic book. We no longer need that, so it's easy for an artist to be like, yeah, I'll draw it. And every artist I know has a great scanner because that's how they make their living.
Right. Yeah.
So they scan it in and they just send you a high res file, and there you go.
Yep.
And I have seen some people kind of complain about that of like, look, and I get it in a way. It's like, because we're talking about writers, it's like, man, I just shelled out $10,000 to make this book and I don't even have anything to show for it. Like I don't even at
No.
least have the art. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I don't know, it's frustrating. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it honestly. Ugh. Oh yeah. No. I think it's tough in the case of traditional art. I think it is tough to ask for an entitlement to the physical pages,
Mm-hmm.
or but digital's a little different though. Like I don't know.
I do agree. Like if you're paying just for digital art,
And if they're just doing digital art, like if like I
that's what I
got
mean. Yeah.
yeah, because I've gotten recently, a pinup done traditionally scanned, sent to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's still people who work traditionally, but
Oh
like
yeah.
I don't know, most people at the level that we're like engaging artists to produce lots of pages and lots of art, like
Mm-hmm.
most of those people are digital now, out of necessity.
Yeah, out of necessity, right?
So like yeah, I think that changes the argument and that changes the situation. But I
Well,
don't
I just think I think it comes down to just it's something that people need to be aware of, and so you
yeah,
just
yeah,
need to
yeah,
put
yeah.
it. You just need to put it in your contract, or
Right.
it needs to be a part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Like I know a guy who self-published his own book, and he put into his contract with the artist that he wanted the physical art.
Wow.
and they agreed on a page rate, and the artist signed the contract, and they made the book. And
Yeah.
then it was like several months later, and he was like, so when am I going to get that art? And the artist was like, what are you talking about?
Oh no.
Yeah. And he's like, look, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but that was in the contract. Like I put it in there that I wanted the physical art, and you signed it. And the artist kind of gave him a hard time, was like, like, look, this is the history of
Oh
the
no.
industry, taking advantage of artists. And he's like, I'm aware of that, but I put it in the contract.
Right.
You signed it. Like, and they came to an agreement, and he didn't get all of the pages, but they came,
Really?
because I mean, he didn't want to get a lawyer involved. Let's be honest, at an indie level, you can't
Yeah.
afford to. It's not worth it. Yeah, like he knew that. He was just really disappointed in the whole process of being like, look,
like,
I'm trying to be on the up and up about this, and
right,
he
that
still
dude did his due diligence. Like,
exactly, yeah.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
if you write it in the contract, you shouldn't also have to mention in an email, by the way, this contract's a little different, like
yeah.
I don't think you should.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And this kind of gets into that uncomfortable of like, contracts are contracts, and it's tough.
Well, I think the hardest thing that like never goes away is like finding an artist, checking them out, engaging them, and finding out their page rate is just like, crushing.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Oh, it's terrible. Like,
I have a few artist friends that I would like to work on something with, and I'm afraid to approach them because I just don't want to. It's like asking a girl out, that, like, it's like your friends, and it's like you all kind of hang out, and it's just like, I kind of want to take it to the next level, but I don't know how they feel about it. And if they say no, it's going to be awkward, and the relationship will be forever tainted.
Yeah, and no is, I want $200 a page.
Right.
Like,
right. Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh no. Yeah. Exactly. So that's a no then.
Yeah. No, that's like, and I don't know. I think I saw something, I don't know when or where, but it was on Twitter, and it was talking about like, making your page rate a visible thing.
Yeah.
Which it would appeal to me if I didn't have to go through the process of introducing myself, my intention, my goals, my credibility, just to find out a number, like, like, no matter, like, I'm not going to reach out to you. You're going to say your number. I'm going to give you like a sob story, and you're going to be like, oh, we can work with that. Like, just give me the number, and I'll say, no, thank you. Like, I can't work with that. Like,
it's funny whenever I hear artists complain about people asking what their page rate is.
Yeah.
And they're like, just tell me your budget and I'll tell you if I can do it. And it's like, well,
yeah. Okay. Fuck that argument. Like, I'm sorry. Fuck that argument. My budget, like, my budget is how I can make comics and feed my family. So, like,
my budget is
it's a few questions. Like,
I know. Yeah. I'm doing this in my spare time, instead of buying an Xbox. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, a budget. I don't know. That's such a funny thing. How many, okay. If you're an indie comic book writer out there and you have a budget, man, that's great for you. I'm happy for you, but like,
yeah,
that's also bullshit.
Yeah, I know. I agree. It just, I don't mind somebody just telling me like what their budget is. And some of the most successful artists I know, that's what they do. They're just like, here are my prices. I'll give you the most professional thing you want, but these are the prices. And I respect that. The artists that I know that do that also have a fairly keen business sense of how they manage their art as a business. And they're just like, look, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time. I'm not. He's like, they know what their time is worth. They know how long it's going to take to do, roughly whatever thing.
Like you said, it's a business. Like,
and they advertise themselves as such, and they do business, And I think there are other artists out there that, part of it is just like that negotiating game of like, you're feeling each other out. Like, how much can I get out of you?
And then,
You
I
know.
mean, like, that's an interesting, even like, I don't know, maybe sort of a thing to have to watch out for as a young creator is like when you, as a younger creator, you actually get involved with somebody who's like professionally at a different level than you are. Like, I don't know. So have you ever had the feeling, and I know the answer is yes, where like someone you went to and you said, hey, can you do this? And they're like, yeah, it costs this. And you're like, oh, fuck. Okay. Like, you paid it because you didn't want to look like an asshole, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and you paid more than your budget, allowed because, you wanted to save face. You didn't want to be that person who was asking about like, oh, you can't, put your money where your mouth is sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, because
Like,
there is that intimidation,
yeah,
like
yeah,
of
I
like,
think,
look, I'm the real
right.
deal.
I'm
I'm not.
serious about this.
I'm serious. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you have to do
absolutely.
that. And like I've gotten that, and I still get into that. I've been making comics for 10 years and I still get that feeling of like, oh, I reached out to this guy, did so much work to find out how much, like, his availability, if he's interested by describing the project, and then find out, how much he costs, and then just like, oh, I've done so much work. Sure,
Yeah.
here's $125 for a digital pinup, black and white. Like, do it.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah.
it's not that I'm not gonna love it, and that I would love to have it, but shit, man, that just like, would
Yeah.
cost me like half a page,
Yeah. One thing that I have done with a few artists that I've worked with is I've offered them a slightly higher page rate for keeping the original art. And that depends on the project, because obviously I can't do that for like a 20-page issue. But if I'm doing like a short story or something, I can be like, like, look, this is my page rate. But if you're willing to part with the original pages, I can maybe do this. So I have a little stack of original art of various things that I've worked on from doing
That's
stuff
awesome.
like that. And it's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but admittedly, I'm both somebody who likes to collect art and is also sentimental. So I
Right.
don't mind having, just that's just going to be in my closet for 50 years. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
but it's let's be frank, it's also up to the artist to evaluate, like, is this worth getting that little extra money right now, or do you think anything's going to happen from it? Because
Right.
you always hear the stories of like, Eric Larson. I just saw this recently. He's a cover, I think, that he did, or maybe a page of original art from Spider-Man, when he worked on Spider-Man, just sold at an auction for like, I don't remember how much, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
and
damn, that's
and
crazy.
he was paid, $300 for that
Right.
page, and and he sold it at a convention for another 200, and now somebody owns it and they just sold it for 30,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you always see stuff like that of like, somebody swooped in and got the art for really cheap early on, and then now they auction off. But it's like, that is a 1 in a million kind
Right.
of a thing.
Out of all the
Right.
comic book pages produced and the covers produced that month that he did that one, like,
Yeah,
that's a fucking crazy story.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, I know there's a, like, I mean, I don't mind saying, like, my regular collaborator Chris McJunkin, he is really, really hesitant to part with any of his original pages.
Yeah.
So I mean, he doesn't even like selling them, not just to me, to anybody that might ask,
Hmm.
to be like, like, hey, original pages for a book that he's worked on. He
Yeah.
really wants to keep them, and I don't blame him, just because he's playing that gambling game of like,
Right.
we're investing into this project, and if it pays off, he can sell the original pages for, really high, and he wants to be
Right.
able to do that later on rather than some other person, and I don't blame him for that. I think that's a perfectly fine choice, but it's a choice that, I think only the person can evaluate. Like, you just have to make
Right.
up your mind. What are the odds? What do I think it's worth? And
How
I do
how
think
many
there's
how many conventions do I want to lug them to try to sell them?
exactly, yeah, yeah. So yeah, there's that whole thing, yeah, because it's
Yeah.
like, it's yeah, you don't want to get weighed down with merchandise. Like, that's
Yeah.
that's something. That's a question. So my first convention, I think I brought 100 trade paperbacks.
Wow.
How many do you think I sold?
I would say, not a slight. I would say you sold 8.
It was about 10.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
10, maybe 12.
Yeah.
And I loaded in this 2 boxes of books. I'm like, I can't wait to do this convention and sell my comics.
Yeah.
And I walked out with like the same 2 boxes full.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that was an eye opener. Like, okay,
totally.
you know.
Mine was the same way. I had like, I think 50 issues of each of the Northern Steelbook issues that were out at the time. And it was my first con, and it was Free State. Yeah. And I sold like 8 copies. And like, I was like,
Yeah.
That's not what I was expecting.
Yep. Yeah. That's why I'm always suspicious when I see people say like, I sold out of all the books I brought to the convention, and I'm like, how many did you bring? Like, like did you only bring 20? Because I mean that's good if you sold 20, but like, you know, because I can say that I did sell out of a book at one con, and we had about 30, and we sold out, and I was so dang impressed. I was like, holy crap. We did it, you know.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
That's actually the most. I think the most I've ever sold was something in the 30s. Like, you know, it's like, I think it's actually like my 3rd convention, and it was just like wild. And you know, like that was probably 6 years ago, and I've never touched that since. Like, you know, maybe gotten close, but nothing like boom. You know. Like,
no, I've never had anything close to that. What we did. Our all ages superhero comic, The Uncontrollable Reclass, that is done with me and Sarah Rude McCune.
Yeah.
And we put out our convention special, which was just a small little manga sized 30-page print book that had the first 2 chapters. And we were giving it away for free with the purchase of like an art print or something. And the trick was like, you know, the art prints cost 10 cents to print, and you sell them for $5. And you go, look, buy this art, you get a free comic book. And we sold out. Rather than selling it for $3. Rather than selling the book for $3, we gave the book for free. Yeah, so that's the only piece of wisdom I can impart to all you listeners out there.
I'm stealing that one. That's great.
Don't sell your comic book. Give it away for free with the purchase of a 25-cent print.
Get this amazing print and take home this shitty comic book.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then the trick is like you have a ringer print. You just get like a really nice print. It costs nothing to print up. And you just be like, buy anything you see here, even this really nice looking one that I know you want, and you get a free comic book.
That's hilarious, dude.
Yeah. So totally worked.
I bet.
Yeah, totally worked. And we did. It's an all ages kid, and we definitely were pushing it on all of the kids. And so there were a lot of parents that were like, we're looking for stuff for kids.
Right.
And we're like, well, you found it. And
like, good luck, man. Like, you know, that's a great audience to go for, because like not very many of those at a comic convention.
No, it's true. And I'm always kind of surprised by that. Like there's so many creators, and it is, you know, a lot of indie stuff. And I've fallen, well, not fallen, but I've given into that impulse of like, I'm making an indie comic. It can be gritty and there's no rules. I don't have to kowtow to the comic book authority, which doesn't even exist anymore. You know, like it's and a lot of indie comics kind of fall into that, and it can be tough for parents that don't know anything about comics, and they're just walking around.
Right.
Like, I thought comic books were for kids, but all these people here, all their art is bloody and sexy. And
even though I didn't grow up in the 50s, for some reason I still think comic books are for, you know, kids.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe they grew up in the 90s, and although Marvel comics, I can tell you, the X-Men comics even were very sexy, but they were still for kids.
That's true. That's true. I mean, like, they were still, I still bought them. So.
Yeah, me too. But so let's pivot to, there's 2 other things I definitely wanted to touch on in this podcast, and I don't want to go too much longer. We're a little at an hour here, but I got some time if you do.
Yeah. You know, totally. Yeah. I don't think there's any problem with talking, you know, doing a little
a little
extra
little dish in,
topics.
yeah, a little
Yeah.
dish on comic book production. So I do want to talk about pitching, which we had just mentioned earlier, and I also want to talk about crowdfunding and
Hmm.
using Kickstarter / Indiegogo / maybe GoFundMe. I don't know. Has anybody tried that? I'm
I
always
have
tempted.
I have a non-launched page started and bookmarked for a series, but I've
Oh,
I've never.
okay,
Yeah, like I was
okay.
like, I'm gonna use GoFundMe, and I took it that far, and I was like, I'm not so sure about this.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm not sure which one would be best to start with first because in I think well actually let me start here. I think that we're like this conversation has loosely followed the path of creating a comic. Like
Hmm.
creatively, you got your idea, you're writing it, you're starting small, you're working yourself up, you find an artist, you agreed on a page rate. Now what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Do like you can put it online, which I guess that could also be a third. There's basically three paths like
Right.
that you kind of have to commit to. You put it online, you uh, put a pitch together and send it
Mhm.
to small publishers, or you crowdfund it yourself. And those
Right.
are not all exclusive. You could
Yeah.
conceivably do all three. Is put your book online and then
Absolutely.
crowdfund it and then pitch it, or in any combination of those three. So they're not all
And
exclusive.
apparently, you can crowdfund your book on multiple crowdfunding sites, which
Oh
is
my God. Okay.
something that
So
I've.
yeah, that is something that I realize now people are doing where
Yeah, like I've seen it like a lot recently, and like I don't know, that
I know I'm well, and this
interesting idea.
it is. And I think it also gets into so like we'll just talk about crowdfunding. I think part of that is there's an audience on crowdfunding platforms, and it's tough to find them because the platforms themselves are not great at promoting anything. In fact, they go out of their
No.
way to tell you that it's not their job to promote anything. That's
Right.
your job. You
Hmm.
need to have your base built in. But
Right.
that being said, there still are people that are like loyal to different platforms.
Hmm.
So there's people that just go to Kickstarter and they support things on Kickstarter and they don't pay attention to Indiegogo, and vice versa. There are people that support things on Indiegogo, and I'll get this out front, even though I'm not necessarily interested in talking about it. I know part of it is just that weird online segment
Yeah.
polarization.
Segmentation.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so there's like the Gamergate people that they've just
Hmm.
made Indiegogo their thing,
Yeah.
and Kickstarter is hashtag Black Lives Matter,
Right.
and it's like you're one or the other, your
Well, it's
team, and it's front. That is a whole separate podcast of how
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
frustrating that is.
Yeah.
Just this polarization where,
Yeah.
but you're right. There are people that still do multiple platforms. I assume because of that reason, because there are multiple people across. I know there was one book that I supported on Kickstarter, and I liked it. It was successful, and then a few weeks later, it was on Indiegogo to just
Hmm.
continue the campaign, I guess, and to get more
Yeah.
money. And
I mean, there's technically nothing wrong with that.
there's no reason they can't. And I guess I don't blame a creator for doing that. You got to go for the audience. And to be fair, there is also an aspect of if your campaign is doing well and it carries the momentum that it needs to get across the goal,
Hmm.
and then it's over, and then there are people are hearing about it after the fact. It's like, oh,
Right.
where can I get this?
And
I
it's inaccessible.
And it's inaccessible. So it makes sense to start with a Kickstarter, get that initial money, and then move on to Indiegogo and basically just use that as a storefront to just
Right.
be like, now we got the money, but let's keep it going. And I got more stuff. Oh, you
Right.
supported the Kickstarter? Well, come on over to the Indiegogo, and now that we're getting more money, I can make more perks for you. So
Right. Yeah.
I
Exactly.
totally get it. I
totally
absolutely
get it.
get it. Yeah, but it's just such a it's a it's not a creative part of the process, and so
Well, and that's kind of I think that division that we sort of like maybe talked a little bit about people getting into it is that there are those people who like that's what they're there for, and like
yeah
but there are people who probably more in line with us who are like I'm going to run one campaign, I'm going to keep it to this audience, and like, we're just real singular, and we don't have that like cutthroat attitude. I'm going to do 6 crowdfunding platforms, like, like
Yeah.
boom bam, like I don't know, like that. The campaigns that I think I find that are like that, I think I'm not interested in those comics, if that's
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I've noticed that too. It's tricky to there's first of all there's just so much being made. Like I am
yeah,
constantly in awe of all the different, because I do back a
right.
lot of stuff on Kickstarter.
Oh, me
I
too.
when I
I
last
became
checked,
a super backer like a couple months ago. So
yeah,
like,
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So it's yeah, but I'm still always in awe. Like there's so much out there.
And
There's constantly.
there's so much out there, and like you can't even back all of that you want to. Like,
Right. Exactly.
especially as a comic creator. That's like
Especially, yeah. It would
that's
be a
that's
lot
another
easier if I wasn't making comics.
right. Yeah, I could back everything I want.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
so let's talk a little bit just about doing crowdfunding and your experience with crowdfunding, because I know we touched on this a little bit in the last podcast that we did, because you've
Mhm.
had successful crowdfunding.
So I guess my boxing record is I've had 3 successful Kickstarters and 1 unsuccessful.
Okay, well that's better
Uh,
than mine.
yeah,
I'm like 2 and 3.
yeah.
I'm probably soon to be 2 and 4, but that's
Well,
neither here nor there.
but honestly, the only reason I think that I feel that I've had that much success is all of those Kickstarters were, I don't know, a few years ago, and like
Mm-hmm.
the whole platform has changed so much. Like, honestly, to the point that I'm intimidated about doing my next Kickstarter because
Yeah,
it's such a different environment.
it is. Yeah, you're right.
But so I guess Kickstarter. In the first episode that we were talking, I think I said like 2014 was my first real experience. Did a
Mm-hmm.
small, and like my goal was 3,000, and I did it. And then I think actually the only ones that I've done successful were in the 3,000 range, 3,500 at the most.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I did one for 6,000 and like didn't even get halfway there.
Yeah.
And that was ironically the one that I spent the most money up front to like produce.
Prep it up. Yeah.
Yeah,
You got
like
to spend money to make money, right?
exactly, right. And like by that time, like, I had the series that it was already 2 issues in, the Northern Steel, so this was the 3rd issue. The art was looking
Mm-hmm.
amazing. So I was like, let's just do it. So I bought like a couple original art pieces and then made prints out of those. I paid for a semi-professional video, and it came out really fucking awesome. And I
Yeah.
was happy with it, but I also paid for that.
Yeah. Just another cost.
Right. I put so much. I paid for original art up front
Mm-hmm.
because it would have had to been shipped in. So I just wanted to make sure that I had it.
Yeah.
So, like, I paid for that up front to get done and sent to me. Like, so it was this idea that like I spent so much up front, and then I set my goal higher because of that. And I think that's
Yep.
part of the reason why I failed. So
Yeah. It's really tough to make that leap to a higher level, and I
it
think
really is. It's
that's
scary.
it is, and I think that's an important part of that kind of evaluation that you need to do as a creator. Not you, I mean
Yeah.
any creator needs to do. Yeah.
You need to, Scott,
but also
right.
Scott, I need you. Speaking to you, Scott Schmidt. No, like because that's I mean that's what I'm struggling with. Like
Yeah.
this episode is going to go up after I currently have a campaign up for issue 5 of the Amoral Stingray on Kickstarter, and this episode will go up after the campaign is finished. So I don't have to be I don't have to pretend to constantly be cheering for it, because I'm just automatically here assuming that it's going to fail.
Yeah.
We're a third of our way to our goal. There's 6 days left. It's just not going to happen. Like,
Right.
and there's a different thing that's going on here where maybe it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I've already given up and I'm not hustling to try and get backers into it, of course it's not going to succeed because I'm not doing the work. But at the same time, it's just like statistics, like the numbers are there.
Right.
You need to have a half or a third of your goal, like after day one, preferably, like,
Yeah.
but like within that first week, you need to be like a third of the way there. Uh, and so we didn't have that, and it's frustrating in its own way. But part of that, and this is part of the lesson that I've learned, is I was aiming a little higher than I'd done in my previous successful Kickstarters. So like you're talking about, you've only succeeded at doing like 3,000 or maybe 3,500.
Yeah.
My most successful Kickstarter ever was 2,000.
Yeah.
And I barely got it. I like scraped by. And so I was like, well, let's aim a little higher, and cover all of the production costs. So it's
Right.
not just I raised $2,000 so that I could print 100 copies of a book that I previously paid $10,000 for.
Right. Yeah.
Like at that point, what do I fucking care about doing a Kickstarter to print some copies of a book that I've already sunk all that money in?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, all right, let's do this. We've got somebody there, because that's the whole point of doing Kickstarter, is that social networking. Part of a Kickstarter is not just selling the book; it's promotion, it's advertising your book, and getting it out in front of people and getting people excited about it, which I hate doing because it's it's hard. It's the worst part. And so it's like I was like, let's do it. Let's do another issue and aim a little higher. And we've got less backers than we did on the first book, and we were wanting more money, so we're not even anywhere near that. Like if our goal was 2,000, I think last I checked we were at like 1,150. So if our goal was 2,000, I could push that and be like, look, people, we just need $800 and we're there. I can't. But I can't go to like the same 100 people that I'm connected with and be like, look, people, we just need $2,000 and we're there. Like there's a difference,
No, totally.
Yeah. So it's frustrating. I know.
Yeah. I mean, like, and I think it's just gotten so much harder as like, because I don't know. I think about it like video games. Like, I don't know if you're a big gamer or not.
Middling.
So like there are certain games that, especially now, like with online stuff, that like are fun games. They come out and you're like, oh, that's awesome. And then someone goes and they get really fucking good at it and they ruin it for everyone.
Oh man.
And like, if that's not Kickstarter, I don't know what it is, because like, you've got all these people like saying like, boom, here's how you do Kickstarter, sign up for a newsletter. Here's a video on how to do Kickstarter. I don't want to do any of that shit. I tried. I know that I've got a Kickstarter coming up. I tried to put myself on a resume of like watching videos, learning more about Kickstarter. I get like a quarter of a way into what I'm trying to, I'm just like, I start puking. I'm just like, oh, I don't care. I don't want to. I can't do that. Like, oh my God.
That's the same thing. Like a friend of mine was very helpful, and they sent me this, like, I guess it's like a self-help. It's like a webinar video from like a published writer he's like, I'm going to share with you all of my tips for becoming successful. And it's exactly what you said. Start a newsletter. Communicate every week with your fans. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I'm doing that, and I don't have any fans. Like, there's that unspoken level of like, like I always joke about that, where people are like, this is the first thing to success. Get your 10,000 followers to buy your book. Right. And it's like, okay, well, how do I get 10,000 followers? I'm like, I don't know. I have them. Well, okay.
They didn't come automatically built in with your Twitter account?
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't have 10,000 followers? Like, oh, sorry.
Oh, well, then you have no shot.
Yeah, so. I have nothing for you. Oh. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right, though. We are absolutely in agreement. The frustrating things about like trying to, it just feels like it's pulling teeth of like, and it feels inauthentic to me.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing about it. Like, it feels unauthentic if I have to go and learn a course that I paid for to figure out how to run Kickstarter. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. And you know what? A little bit of it, this is probably our fault. We're probably both like, considered romantic writers. Like, we have a romance about the industry. So
absolutely.
like, we think that we should just be able to put something out there and be like, dude, it's good. And
Yeah,
people should buy it. And then
yeah.
they should want it. And that's all there is. Like,
I
uh,
know that's my
and
biggest problem.
yeah,
People are
mine too.
stupid, right?
Right.
Like,
Like, you're talking to a guy and who can't understand why Mounties aren't badass to everyone.
right, right.
Like I see the writing on the wall, right? Like
Hmm.
Mounties are fucking awesome, but the majority of the Earth population thinks they're, goofballs, and like,
Yeah, yeah.
they don't give
It's a
a shit.
punchline in South
Yeah, yeah,
Park,
yeah,
you know.
exactly, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, like,
And I wanna put a little caveat or a little asterisk there. I'm not saying that people who can be or people who are successful doing that are being inauthentic. I think they
no,
are
no,
being authentic. I think it comes naturally to them to
right,
be that type of
exactly. It
outgoing
has to.
person. And
Yeah.
that's why they're successful. It feels authentic when I try to do it.
Hmm.
And I feel like I come across as authentic, and
Right.
that is reflected in the fact that I'm not successful at doing the things that everybody else is also doing and finding success.
Right. Yeah. No, I
You
I
know,
definitely I I'm that. That's what I meant to say.
but
Yeah.
no. I
Yeah.
got you, but I just wanted to underline that because just so there's no confusion.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy for it to come across like sour grapes, like, oh,
Yeah. Right.
all these hack fakers just out there,
Exactly.
and it's
No,
like,
because
no,
like,
that's not what it is. I'm not begrudging anybody else's
right,
success. I'm
like,
very
because you've
happy.
been sold a book before at a con,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's awesome.
exactly.
It's like,
Yeah,
oh, that sounds fucking cool. Like,
yeah,
here's my money. Like, that's
I'm
awesome.
into it. Yeah.
And I walk away like, man, I wish I could do that.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, exactly. So
So yeah,
that's
we don't begrudge those folks who have that innate ability to do that.
right, right.
We're just
So
terrible at that.
it's just not good at it, and I
Yeah.
don't necessarily think it's. I think it's something that can be learned, but not easily, and not always. I
Right.
do
I mean,
think
there's a
that.
difference between learned and latent ability,
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're talking about just like the frustrating aspects of crowdfunding and social media, and yeah, all of that, because it's all tied together. There's this
yeah.
whole landscape out there of crowdfunding and social media. So like maybe you don't have a lot of confidence in doing that. So your other option is to try and other than just making it yourself and putting it online and hoping, because there are people that find success doing that, like, but
Yeah.
with webtoons now, and
I will say most of those people are artists. Like,
yes, that's I was about to say that's part of the problem, is it's easier to do that as an artist than as a writer trying to publish a book,
right.
because um, first of all, there's more of a long game to doing web comics, and it's like if all you're doing is investing your time, like, let's go get a part-time job. It's not glamorous, but you got it, and you can pay your
Yeah.
bills, and then you got so many hours in the week to just write and do your thing, and you put that online, and you can do that for a year or two, and maybe you can find success doing that, and then all the other stuff comes easier. Then you can do your crowdfunding, and you got that built-in fan base, or you can pitch
Right.
and you can be like, look, I'm this, here's my successful thing, you know what I
Right.
mean, like, so all that comes easier from doing that, but that is a hard path to take as a writer who's self-publishing, and I'm saying that as somebody who's been doing that for 10 years, and
Yeah.
I've had like 3 different websites, and I have not found any success on any of the hosting sites. In fact, in my last episode that I did with a cartoonist, Sam Weber, we talked about his book. He has a comic on Tapastic also, and
Hmm.
that's like a little preview of the gripe session that this episode turned into, where I was complaining about algorithms and how, like, I got comics online and nobody knows that they exist,
Yeah.
and it's great that those hubs are out there to keep costs down as a creator, because, like, look, I've been paying web hosting bills, and I've been
Right.
paying ownership of domains, and then all that adds up, and now it's like, it's really nice to be able to just go to a hub like Webtoons or Tapastic, and you can just upload anything you want.
Right.
But unless you're making a very specific type of comic, it's probably not going to get a lot of traction because they are also catering to their own base. Like they all kind of like, it's like a self-segregating thing where
it is.
Yeah.
It's strange. Like, yeah.
Yep. But anyway, so that all of that is to say, like, web comics, totally an option. But if you're a writer trying to publish, it's not necessarily
it's not gonna get you where you want to be.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
I won't say it won't. There could be a lightning in the bottle situation. Right. I'm not saying don't do it, but you know, like, what you're saying.
I think do it as a short-term goal. Like, do it to keep yourself honest. I think that's one of the things that, like, I actually started the Northern Steel Patreon. I guess it's been about 2 years, and I just did it expecting, like, I just needed to keep myself on a schedule. You know, I needed to have something that, like, would just keep me honest by, like, post every week. You know, like, just And fortunately, I had a backlog, so I could do that. When I started it, I had 2 full issues that I was going to release once a week. So that gave me, like, a lot of months, and I was in development of the next issue. So, like, you know, they kind of just, you know.
Yeah, it's quite a lead-in time to have like 40 some odd weeks. That's like almost a year. Yeah.
So, like, you know, but like that's what it did though. Is like, because I did that, that's why I'm to the end of issue 4. Like, you know, we've got 5 more pages to go, and then we've got another complete issue. You know, art wise, you know, it's not to say colors and letters and stuff, but like, if I hadn't started that Patreon, I don't think I would have been able to, like, keep, like, chugging on, like, paying out and, like, keeping on this, you know, series.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, I just needed that thing to keep me honest. Like, I think it really...
that's a good point. And that also kind of underlines the importance of deadlines, which is something that I like to stress. Like, it is... It's... If you can't impose your own deadlines, you need to find somebody else who will do it for you. And posting online is one way to do that.
I think it's
got a schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And it's super beneficial. Like, I think it's because it's so easy to, like, bail on something that you only have, like, that no one else has seen, that it's, you know, all inclusive to you. And, like, you know, you're like, it's just so easy to not keep with that. But when you've got it out in the public, even if no one's reading it, because it's public, it's sort of
there's just that I mean, if you're a neurotic artist, like we are, it's like people can see this, and they're going to see that I haven't updated in forever.
And if they see that I'm a failure,
they're going to know that I suck. Exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, totally. So, but okay, so there's that. But so, like, realistically, you want to get your book out there as a writer, fund it yourself, or start putting together pitch packages and take it to small publishers. Now, that's definitely something that I have struggled with, partially because I don't mean to turn this whole podcast into a pity party or turn my whole life into a pity party, but it's like, I do feel like I'm constantly out of sync with the entire industry, you know? And I think we may have even talked about this in our last podcast. But like when I got into this idea of, like, I want to make comic books, and it's like I started investing in it and I'm putting together ideas. It was like the year that Diamond announced that they were, like, raising the bar of the minimum orders it takes to send out a book through Diamond.
Wow!
And it was like small, like, big name small publishers were like, well, we're not hitting that quota. I guess we're not distributing through Diamond anymore. Like Slave Labor Graphics, who did, like, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac and a bunch of other books. They were just like, oh, we don't know what we're doing. Like, our books, our books they're no longer being carried by Diamond. And the company is not really doing anything anymore, as I understand it.
Really?
They're kind of in a, I don't have up to the minute news on Slave Labor Graphics. I just know that was absolutely a huge blow to them when Diamond was like, we're, you know, and other publishers the same. And so there was definitely this attitude of, like, there's not even a point of trying to get into Diamond, because previously what indie publishers were getting through Diamond into comic book shops, it's no longer good enough. Like Diamond is only going to be carrying Marvel and DC and Image, and that's it. Dark Horse and Boom maybe, and Dynamite if they're lucky. And I think that was kind of the perspective for a while. It was like you either have to have a connection at Image or Boom or IDW or Dynamite, or you have to go with some fly-by-night small publisher that nobody's ever heard of, and they can't get you into Diamond, but they will cover the costs of the book and sell it on their website and at conventions.
They will do something for you.
They will do something, and it's vague and nebulous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And so all of this, what I was really getting at though is, so that was when I started, where I was like, web comics are like my only option because I'm not getting into Diamond. I'm not publishing issues, so I'm just going to go on the web and just put my stuff out there and just have people read it. I at the end of the day, I want my stuff to be read. I don't want it to just sit on my computer, So that was the path that I took, and I am kind of happy to say, like, after 10 years, I am really surprised to see that there has been enormous growth in the small publisher market.
Yeah,
and there are a lot of small publishers that are slowly making names for themselves, getting books into Diamond and getting into comic book shops. And I can't even list them all on one hand. Like the amount of publishers that are in Diamond, they put books out, they're in comic book shops, and they have open submissions.
Yeah,
and it used to be a day when there was no such thing as an open submission. If you wanted, if there was somebody that you wanted, Image has always officially had open submissions, but literally they have published 5, like 5. Okay, not literally, but it is something like 5 unsolicited comics that ever got sent to them in their entire 30-year publishing history.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's so small. Like one of them was Jonathan Hickman, as I understand it. His nightly news series was like an unsolicited pitch that he sent in, and somebody liked it, and they published it, and now he's Mr. King of the comic book industry, Jonathan Hickman.
That's wild.
Yeah, just
out of all the books like that I think about it, like that one, like it's
I know.
Well, that's interesting because like he was, I didn't realize that he actually did all the art.
He did all there's all vector graphics.
Yeah, like his first 2 or 3, like Pax Romana. I think it was like his book after that. He did the art for that too. That's crazy.
Yep.
Anyway.
So yeah, the lesson to break in as a writer is first be an artist.
Right. Good luck.
Yeah. But I am happy to see that there is a lot of smaller publishers now that have open submissions, and so I do think there are more options out there now to submit. Like if you got a new idea, than there used to be.
I think so too. At the same time, I will say that I think. So I guess we're talking about pitching in general, right?
Yeah.
So I think that how we talked about originally, like that we came in at a certain time, I think that's even shifted, like from when we started to something even different now. Because in my opinion, a lot of the smaller publishers that you're talking about, like the one that I can think of the most is Scout Comics.
Yeah. Yep.
As far as I can tell, they basically publish Kickstarter books. Like
I actually watched an interview with the publisher of Scout or the editor-in-chief of Scout, basically the guy that's in charge of Scout, and he kind of talked about that a little bit.
Was it Stickney?
What's that?
Stickney? Charlie Stickney?
No, that wasn't the name. So it was somebody else. But it was another podcast, like another creator's podcast, where they were interviewing him, but they were talking about that, about how he was. I mean, he obviously had positive things to say about, like, we're just getting to as many audiences as possible. We're not going to cut off a Kickstarter audience, and it's like on some level that makes sense to me. But yes, on another level, it does sort of seem like, okay, I do all the work, I do this Kickstarter, and then you put your logo on my book and take a cut.
Yeah.
right. Like, yeah,
I think that I think that's a publishing model that has appeared. Like
I think so too. And
I
it's
think that there's a
important.
I
It's
think that
important to
there
watch out for that. Yeah.
right. Like I don't have a book published by any of these companies, so I can't quite say.
Yeah, I
You
haven't even pitched to them. So I'm like, I don't have.
yeah, yeah,
I actually know people that have books out by Scout, and they talk very highly of them. So I'm
yeah,
not.
exactly.
This is not a specific dig at Scout. They just got
No,
brought up because they're just one example. There are several companies that are doing that.
right.
That
Well, I think it's just like a shift in how comics are made. Like because from a
yes.
publisher perspective, why should and I think
Hmm.
can also go and talk a little bit to like you and I about maybe how we perceive comics worked when we very first started to what they are now.
Yeah, yeah.
The idea that I think that I'll try to do this real quick, but like I
Mm-hmm.
think when we started, I think there was sort of an idea if you had a good idea and you like got your buddy on board and like if you paid for some pages and you got it to a publisher, it would be picked up and they would pay for the rest of it and it would be published, and that's how romantic comics happen, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
that does not happen anymore.
No.
I'd say it started to shift out of how things happen when we started. There
Mm-hmm.
was kind of the shift, and now that does not happen. You
Right.
can't do that unless your name is Rick Remender or
Yeah.
and um, you know Jeff Lemire, like if
Yeah.
Matt Kent, like you have to be that type of person to be like, hey, like your page rate's guaranteed, but we're gonna need to do every bit of piece of art first,
Yeah.
like that just doesn't happen, So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know,
Yeah. No, you're right. It is frustrating that level of there is, and I don't know. Like part of it is just there's just that level of stress that's on the writer of like, because I mean I'll go ahead, I'll just say this on me, it's a huge deterrent to even try and pitch, because it's
yeah,
like I can barely fund this first issue,
exactly,
and then we get it done, and then we pitch it, and then it gets accepted, and they're
picked
like,
up.
okay, congratulations, you're good enough to be published. Now, you know, now it's all on you. You have to keep paying, and you have to keep the money going. And it's like if the sales aren't there, even if the sales are there, like it's still not enough. Really, like the industry's the sales are so small just across the
Right.
board in general. Like even if the sales are there, that the publisher's like, yeah, this is enough that we'll keep publishing it, but you're not literally making enough to pay the artists what you agreed to pay them, because this is,
Because
it's
you have to sell it for $4 a piece.
exactly, yeah. And so it turns into this thing of like, even there's this it's, I don't know, maybe it's that fear of success thing, but there is this level of like, even if we're successful, I still lose.
Well, yeah, even if you succeed in this, it doesn't mean you're going to succeed in the next part. Like
Yeah,
that's the twisted, fucked up thing about comics. And like
yeah, yeah.
the situation that you're describing is the exact thing that happened with Final Street,
Mm-hmm.
my book with Devil's Due. Like, I'll talk pretty candidly about like the things that went on with them and stuff. But like basically, like they're like, yeah, we like your pitch. We like your book. It was finished. They found it in a pitch that we gave them, like, and called us a couple months later after a con,
Mm-hmm.
and like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And they're like, boom, boom, boom. We're in diamonds getting printed. No one ever said anything about issue 2. Like, and we were so excited about the aspect of publishing issue 2 or issue 1 that we didn't think about number 2.
Yeah,
But we would have to crowdfund it, right? So the
yeah,
next thing, like, we found out is we're having to crowdfund this issue in the middle of like this 6-month hiatus of issue 1, and just like like what even happened there? And like it's because they weren't looking out. They weren't like looking about like what kind of publisher doesn't say, oh, when's the next issue coming out if we're gonna go ahead and distribute it through Diamond,
yeah. That sounds like a
that's
weird communication thing
yeah.
going on.
And like
Yeah,
but I think that's an example of a publisher in these times when they see a finished comic, like, yeah, boom, snatch it up, let's do it, print it,
yeah.
like, boom, let's go.
But and it's also another, it's another level of the the creators are just kind of expected to do it all on their own. And
exactly.
And like at this point, the publishers are just like a slight nudge.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's publishers that'll be like, look, we'll get your book in Diamond. And that's not nothing. Like that's, like that's not nothing. That is something.
It's more than I can sell.
Exactly. Like I don't have any of my stuff in Diamond.
Yeah.
So that is something. But there's still, this kind of goes back into that naivete thing of starting out, where it's like, no, you really do got to do everything.
Yeah.
And you can't count on the publisher for nothing.
Mm-mm.
And I mean, I even saw people saying that, when I started, I saw people saying that about Image. And I remember kind of being like, it's like, oh, boo-hoo, they're not paying for advertising. Like, you got to advertise your own book. Like, so do I, you know what I mean? and it's like, I kind of get it also, where it's like, there is this sense of like, I made it. I'm at a freaking Image,
Right. I
and
shouldn't have to do anymore.
I shouldn't have to, but you do, because that's how little money is actually there for. That's how Image is able to do what they do, is because the creators just have to do it. And the thing is,
just like, don't pay for anything.
Yeah, exactly. And all creative industries have kind of shifted in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a big long diatribe. I mean, this was a few weeks ago. Like an article. It was about the YA novel genre and Twitter, and it was all about how like Twitter became a cesspool for YA novelists, because essentially all these authors got caught in the trap of, you have to be on Twitter all the time to advertise yourself, because the publisher can't afford to advertise it. So this is a great way for free advertising. Be on Twitter, and all these crazy fans that are obsessed with you will be able to constantly be in touch with you, and you can convince them to buy your book. And then it just turns into this ugly mess of, they're not actual real fans. Like, they're not the people you're trying to reach to buy the book. It's a very small portion of people on Twitter that are all... it's it turns into like this weird parasitic harassment where you need them and they need you, and they're
trying to tell you how to write the book and shit like that.
Exactly. And it's creatively destructive, because like you're no longer even like writing the book is secondary to your job on Twitter promoting the book for the publisher.
These fans,
but it kind of becomes a thing where like you're no longer trying to promote something that you wrote. You're trying to write something so that you can promote it to these people. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the publisher needs something to publish, and your job is to promote that thing. That's your primary job. Your secondary job is to just write something, but the primary thing is promotion.
Right.
And it's so counterintuitive to the creative, as you've been saying, like the romanticizing of the creative fulfillment, the creative life. And as we say, I think some people just take to that easier than others. I've long had this theory that social media self-selects for certain personality types to be successful in the arts, and we might be unaware of a whole swath of people that are no longer like success is closed off to them because they're not the personality type to be on social media. Absolutely. And I'm not just saying that about myself. This is not a gosh darn it, if only somebody would pay attention to me, because as is always the case, I know so many creators and I know so many people that are just awesome, and I love their work, and I can't figure out why they're not finding more success in what they do. Across all spectrums of art, not just comic books. Like there's so many great creators out there, and it's always just a mystery of like, why don't more people know about this? Like, why? And it's like, oh, I'll do everything I can to promote them, but my 20 people that follow me are not gonna do as much for you as you might like.
Right. Yeah. I can't promise anything like that.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know.
I think pitching is basically, I don't think it exists anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, I've kind of had that feeling for a while.
I think that so I recently paid someone to assess a series of mine through a critique, someone who is like, uh, in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm gonna edit this out, but can I ask, was it the guy from Top Shelf?
no.
Oh, okay, okay.
Uh,
I just know that I've already forgotten his name, but he just launched like a creator assessment program essentially where
really?
like you could pay for like an hour Skype call or Zoom meeting, and he
That's
would
better than
read.
what I paid for.
Oh, okay, yeah, he would like read your pitch or your book and just hour
Let you
long
have it.
conversation. Just like, here's my opinion as the publisher for Top Shelf Comics.
Yeah.
Which I think is very valuable, and the prices seem very affordable too. I was
Yeah.
very If I had a project that was at that
Stage.
stage, I would absolutely jump on it, but I don't. But anyway, so going back to what you're saying, I've been in that situation too, where I paid somebody,
Yeah.
to get that outside help, that outside perspective. So anyway,
to
so
get
you were.
to get the opinion of someone who knows what you consider them, that they would know what they're talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
I did. Honestly, it took too long for it to actually culminate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Before I found success with the project, so I didn't even need the critique. But it came from someone who is in the industry, right? But
Okay.
like he's like his, so he shot me all of his pitches, some
Mm-hmm.
of his recent stuff, and like when I was reading his pitches, all I could think of was like, there is the only way that someone would read this if it was coming from an established person.
Yeah.
It was a PDF. It was a couple art images, and it was a lot of text talking about this series and a pitch, just like the pitches that probably you and I were given, like the outline for of how to pitch to a
Mm-hmm.
publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading those, and like, no offense, like if anybody can connect the dots, but like I just sat thinking to myself, if I was an editor, there's no way in hell I would publish this. This is the most boring thing I've ever read because it's taken me 20 minutes to read a pitch. And
Yeah.
like, that's not how it works. And like, all that made me think of was like, this guy is pitching to companies now. And like, I don't think he knows, like, I think he's just riding on the fact that he's had success previously because he doesn't pitch in a way that people can relate to now,
Mm-hmm.
in which books get published. I don't think. And
Yeah.
like, and that just made me realize that like pitches aren't the same. They're not handled anymore like they used to be. Like, you can't pitch an idea. You can't pitch an unfinished comic book, I don't think.
No,
And
okay, so that was something that I was unsure if I was going to bring up, but it's something that really frustrates me. So
yeah.
I'm going to lay this out there because I've been thinking about this a lot. And also, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I recently read the Jack Kirby biography, written and illustrated by Tom Scioli. It's a great
Mm-hmm.
book.
Oh,
Not
he's
in Yeah. Oh,
fantastic.
Tom Scioli is the man. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, not endorsed by the Kirby estate, but it's just his his biography of Jack Kirby, and it's really good. It's taken entirely from interviews with Kirby, so it's all kind of said in Kirby's own voice. Anyway, there's an interesting aspect to that. Like, I love the history of comic books, and I love reading about Jack talking about coming up with all these characters and like pitching to somebody. And back in the 50s or the 40s, and even into the 60s, pitching was draw a picture of a character and give me a paragraph description of what that character is. And can you make a book out of that? Like, it was
Right.
so light. And so now there's this interesting situation that's going on in the comic book industry where nobody plans for a long form series.
Right.
You can't. It has to be basically planned as a mini series.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in this awkward situation where you can't plan, like, unless you're Jonathan Hickman, or unless you're like at that level, you're at the top of your game. You can't pitch something to be like, you can't pitch something that's like small scale or too large of a scale. It has to be this
Right.
weird middle scale where it can be perfect size to be adapted into a movie. And you can't just be like, here's my perfect first issue. We've got some ideas for the characters. We're going to plant some seeds for stuff that can be evaluated later on.
Right.
I don't know exactly how it's going to end. I have an idea, but it's like, I don't know when I'm going to do that, because I would like to be able to do this as many issues as possible. So if I have to do the ending in 5 issues, we'll do it in 5 issues. But if we can do it in 100 issues. And, it's like, you can't just like, you can't start that small and open-ended, but you also can't be so epic to be like, here's, the next 5, here's the 5-year plan for the story.
Right.
It has to be, here's the 5-issue plan for something that back in the day could have been done in 1 issue.
Exactly.
And so it's really frustrating in that, because like as a creator, I prefer kind of an old school approach. This is the problem that I have coming into comics, where I think of it as characters and as long form series. Mm-hmm. And I like telling stories that are self-contained into a single issue with like a plot thread going through in the background.
Absolutely.
I grew up reading Chris Claremont X-Men comics. That's what I like. And it seems like you can't pitch something like that anymore.
It's too much of a gamble.
Yeah. It's frustrating.
From the publisher.
From the publisher, yeah. And that's not to say that I'm not sympathetic or I don't understand that, because like,
right, because like, there's series that like, you've even read, like, have been like, oh, I'm the only person reading this, and they've spent 8-10 issues on this, like,
so. Exactly. So yeah, I don't know, it's just, but it's interesting what you were saying about like, you can't just pitch an issue and be like, who knows where it's gonna. I don't even mean it for it to sound that open-ended, but like, it's like you have to have. It's almost like every pitch has to have the twist ending that you're going to put in the 4th issue, and that's what that makes or breaks whether or not the book gets picked up. So there's no room for like the creative, collaborative exploration that comes from working on a book with an artist. It's
like, with that, like that month-to-month progression, and like that idea, like, okay, where are we going to take it from now? And there's like there's this like period of time for things to culminate and like, percolate and stuff.
Right.
So.
Yeah. That creative chaos that I like to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like that's been replaced by like, oh, hey, you produced a 4-issue comic book in your spare time. Let's take a look at it. Yeah, we'll publish that. Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
And if it's successful, maybe we'll do more, but it has to be in these 4-issue chunks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think pitching now it's really hard to talk about it, because it feels like it wasn't a thing that I had a chance to do a lot of from the time that I entered the industry.
Right.
And the times that I did it either was a debacle from the start or it turned out badly.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had like a great pitching story, so like, and now it's more or less gone in really what it started out as. You're not pitching anything, now you're just presenting.
Exactly. Yeah, you're just presenting. That's a good way to put it.
Here's my finished comic book. Would you like to publish it? Oh, it looks good enough. Sounds good. Like.
Yeah. And that is something that always bothered me too, because like, it was hard to get a straight answer from some publishers of whether or not they wanted like a full issue done. And it's like, they all say like the requirements is like, we want to see 5 pages, so that's how we know it's enough to evaluate. But it's I bet
you that's what Image's submission page still says is we need 7 pages of sequential art to prove something.
Exactly. So. Yeah, but it's like nobody's looking at it if it's not a completed product.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's like, honestly, like if we could cap everything that we that we've talked about tonight, is that's one of the most important things, I think, as a creator getting into writing comics, is that I think you have to be prepared to like create your project from beginning to end. If you're serious about publishing with a publisher.
Yeah.
Like self-publishing is like, it's its own beast. It's its own lifestyle,
yeah.
But to do it as a comic book writer, being published by, the being published by the publishers that you read, I think, like, you have to be prepared to just like make that comic book from beginning to end.
Yep.
It's
No, I agree. I do think that's, that is the rough wake up call for a lot of people. Even even like us having like stepped into it and being like, yeah, I want to go in this direction. There's still this level of like, wow, it's like I heard that you would have to do everything yourself, and I'm still surprised at how much I have to do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like, well, I mean, you've got 5 issues into Stingray, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got 4 issues into Northern Steel. Like, like we're still like getting battle scars for how this whole thing works, like 5 issues in. That's wild. Like, but honestly, that's probably more people's story than the opposite,
I think so too. Yeah. But so I think that's a good capper. We've actually been going for about 2 hours here, so this turned into quite the writer's retreat. As I've joked before on this podcast, in many ways this podcast is just a creator mental wellness check.
Dude.
We just got to get together and just make sure we're all sane and air some grievances and check in on each other. Right. Yeah. Well, man. Yeah. That was. I think we had some good conversation here. I hope anybody that's listening can, get what they get out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think I'll fall back on the first thing I said, talking about like people that want to know how to make a comic and like what to do. And the answer is, man, the internet is at your disposal. Like you can just go on Twitter, go on Facebook, just message people and ask them, and you will likely get an answer.
It's easier now.
It's easier now than ever
has been before.
Yes, and I guess that's the flip side to this whole thing of like part of the whole gripiness that's come across in this podcast is like, it's still so easy to make a comic book, like especially historically, like like part of like we're complaining about how pitching is no longer good. That used to be the only way to get it done. You used to there was no way to publish something unless you pitched to Marvel and they got an artist for you, and then you were locked into that. Like the fact that you can do it yourself now cannot be understated. And I do think that's an important, maybe positive thing to kind of end this on. It's the problem is not as much of a complaint about the way things are. It's just a frustration with having to figure it out, because I'm just not always good at that,
Right. Yeah. And I think that like most creative people will identify with that struggle of like having to, tackle something from an industry perspective. That's just like it's not where we're drawn to. Otherwise we wouldn't be creating the things that we are.
Exactly. I would have a highly paid job as an editor for some company if it's like, no, I'm drawn to the creative process, which means I don't know crap about anything else. Hey everybody, Aaron Walther here, just reminding you that if you like this podcast, please subscribe to the channel. Also, head over to secondthoughtcomics.com to stay up to date on the various comics that I write. For a limited time, I'm giving away a free PDF of my latest graphic novel, The Amoral Stingray. All you have to do is sign up to the Second Thought Comics newsletter. Link is in the description. Thanks for reading.